Hey, this is Flash Basics 4, Timing and Camera. Alright, last class we covered some timing, slow ins and slow outs, and some stretch and squash. In this class we'll do this again, but this time we'll follow a path of action with the ball bouncing through space, and then edit this in the graph editor, and we'll also do a camera move to follow the action. So you'll open up your project file and you'll notice the ball is here, and we added in some background elements just so we can see the camera pan a little bit better. And there's a reference file in here for you. It's a little snippet from Preston Blair's cartoon animation book. It's a really good reference. It's old school, but there's a lot of great stuff in there to reference. This is what the cover of the book looks like. If you take a look at the action of the bouncing ball, you'll see that how the drawings are spaced closer together at the top of the arc for the bounce, and this causes the action to move slower. And then as it starts to accelerate toward the ground, the drawings get further and further apart until it impacts the ground. The drawings being farther apart causes the animation to move faster, and at the same time as they're getting farther apart, the ball is starting to stretch, giving us that impression of that it has weight to it. And then further demonstrating that feeling of weight, we squash the ball on impact. And we're going to do the same thing as last class. We're going to give it a bit of a moving hold just to add a little bit of springiness to it. And then when it launches up into the air, it stretches again, and then the same thing happens over again. The drawings are spaced farther apart, causing the motion to be quick, closer together, slower, faster, and over again. We're going to have our ball decrease in height though. It's doing it here too. The arc of the bounce here is higher and then it's a little bit lower. Ours is going to decrease the height of the bounces until it comes to a rolling stop, and we're just going to settle at the end. So this reference is just here for your own reference. You can select it, put it on a display layer. I'll just do this for you. We'll name it. And you can shut that off if you like. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do before we start animating is we're going to lay out the scene. That's just something that somebody in the layout department might do in an animation studio. Basically, they place all the characters and objects in the scene within the camera view. Just very basic animation, and they place the camera. They'll do any camera moves that occur in the scene as well. Let's do the camera first. Alright, so I'm going to open up my outliner. Remember to expand the camera, use the position control, and we'll just zoom right out in the perspective view so we can see the entire stage. We'll start at one end and end at the other. So there's the end. Make sure the end isn't, make sure we don't see the end of here of this. It probably doesn't matter in if you're going to render it, but just for posterity we'll just set the camera here, and make sure we're on frame 1, and we'll set a key on that. Let's press S on your keyboard, set a key for the camera pause. And then let's estimate how long this should go on for. So I'm just going to hit play, and we'll watch this. Let's just go to frame 100 and go back into your perspective view, and we'll just drag this camera, slide it over an X, and we'll just go to the other end here, somewhere around there. So once we've done that, we keyed everything by pressing S. Doesn't really matter. I like to just key everything just in case I need to manipulate another channel. We just move this in X. That's all we're really concerned about. And you can see in the corner here, your X-axis is your right and left, as usual. As we discussed before, we're always looking at our stage. We're looking into the Z-axis. So you can see in here the camera's positioned that way. It's oriented along the Z. So this is basically our stage. Let's think of it that way. All right. So if we scrub over this now, or actually we can just play it. See how fast that is, and I think that's going to be just fine. We'll probably have to adjust it later on, but we're just laying this out. It's rough. Alright, so now let's do our ball. Let's go back to frame 1, and let's drag our ball over. Just grab the placement control, this outer square here. So we're just going to key that for now. Let's drag our ball over, and we'll start it off frame. So we'll bring it on the other side of this line here. This is our camera view, and just give that a key, and let's bring it to frame 100 on the timeline, and then in the perspective view just move it in X, and we'll end it right about there, and press S on your keyboard and key that. So you'll see in the graph editor, if we just select X, that's all we're concerned about at the moment, you'll see the animation curve for the translate X. Eases in, starts slow, goes at a constant rate, and then slows into the last pose. If we grab our camera position, it's the same thing, and the translate X on the camera is the same. So they're basically going to be doing the exact same thing right now. So that's pretty much it for the layout. If the reference is bothering you, you can just hide it. Alright, so what we're going to do, we're going to start animating this, and then we'll refine it after. So we're going to start blocking it out, and we're going to go with the standard workflow that I've already discussed and explained to you. So let's grab our move control, use all the controls we need to get it into its first position, and then we're going to use our ball button to select everything and key it. This is why we left out the placement control, because the placement control is just to get it, just to set the placement. That's why we just laid it out like that. But when we start animating the poses of this ball bounce, we don't want to have that keyed. Alright, so let's grab this move control, which is the blue ring that's around it, and we'll move it up. We're going to start the ball bounce at the top. So I'll give you a little example before we start setting poses. Here's some animation I did earlier. Okay, so the bounces are going to decrease in height until it comes to a rolling stop, and it's going to settle and ease into that last position. So we'll just bring it up high here. We'll select all the controls by hitting our shelf button, and I'm going to press 1 on the keyboard. Set a key. It's our first one. And if you don't like working with this, you can see the time marker is really skinny here. You can drag your time range down a little bit, your time slider, or the range slider down a little bit. I always usually like to work with it at around 100 or something like that. It's just a little more comfortable. I'm just going to select my camera again and give it a 10 frame hold. I want to copy frame 1 to frame 10 just so the camera doesn't move for 10 frames, and then give our ball a chance to enter frame. But you can copy frame 1 and then go to frame 10 and paste. Or, this is what I usually do, is go to frame 1 on the key that we want to copy, hold the middle mouse button down, and drag over to wherever you want to go, how far you want to go. I'm just going to go to 10. Release the middle mouse button and press S. And you can see it held. If I select my Translate X, I have my camera selected. If I go to Translate X in the graph editor, you can see it held it for 10 frames, so it's flat, so no movement at all for 10 frames. And then it begins to move. So if we scrub our timeline, you can see for 10 frames the camera doesn't move at all. So I just want to give our ball a chance to enter frame. Our first position on frame 1 is up here. So let's go with our second position. So remember, we want it to hang for a while at the top, so we're going to have our poses a little closer together and more in-betweens. So because we need lots of in-betweens, we have to space these further apart, these poses. So let's go to frame 10. Remember, this is just blocking. It's rough. So this isn't going to be carved in stone. We can adjust this later. Okay, so we'll go to frame 10 and we'll just lower it a little bit. We're going to get this arcing motion so that it impacts the ground. So we'll start to move this down. We're just going to work with the move control right now. Okay, so we have our second pose set. We'll scrub over that. Okay, we can fix that dip later. We don't want it to do that, but we'll fix it later. And let's go 4 more frames down the timeline. We'll bring that right down to the ground plane. You press F on your keyboard if you need to center it, focus in on it. And we'll press S on our keyboard. So we went with 10 frames, and then the next pose is just 4 more frames. So if we scrub over that and take a look at it, we can see we got this action going on. So we went 4 frames. Let's do another 4 frames to get it up in the air. Now because this placement control is moving us in X, we don't really have to worry about X. We're just going to use the move control and animate it up and down in Y. So I gave it another 4 frames, and now it's starting to come up. So you can see we got this V action. We did 10 frames between the first and second pose, so let's just do from here, we can do maybe 8. We'll do less. We won't go as high. So the first frame was way up here. The second bounce, let's go to this height. And then hold control down, greater than 5, 6, 7, 8. Bring it back down to the ground. You can focus in on it here by pressing F. Let's make sure it's touching the ground. Alright, so let's see what we have so far. So we'll just keep going. So at this point we're just going to bring it, or 5, 6, we'll just go 6 frames and bring it up again. And we'll go a little less high than the last one. So we got this height, we'll just bring it a little lower this time for 6 more frames. Bring it down to the ground. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. set a key. I'm just checking my heights. And we can go a little higher with this one probably. So I'm only going to go 4 more frames. Just going to decrease the spacing, and we're decreasing the positions too. 2, 3, 4. Let's just check our animation right now. Select the camera view, hit this button to go to frame 1, and let's play it. 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. 3 frames down the timeline. Press F on our keyboard to focus, and we'll bring it down so it touches the ground. Another 3 frames. And this one isn't going to be very high at all. So let's just check that height on the last one. And it's not very high. And then we'll just do 2 frames over, and we can bring it down. If you want to, you'll notice you can see the translation Y curves in the graph editor. I mean, you can do it this way too. Instead of moving it in the perspective window, you can grab these curves and just bring it down. So I'm going to go 2 more frames down the timeline. You can bring it up. And you can see the height this way too. Let's give it 2 more frames. We'll bring it down again. Okay, now we're just going to roll. So from here to 100, we'll just bring it to a roll. Alright, so let's take a look at it now. Okay, the timing's pretty goofy, so we're going to have to fix that. So let's go into our graph editor and just see if we can fix the timing here. It's a little fast near the end. 1, 2. So these start to get a little too quick. So we can drag, so you can see the spacing here isn't as much as the previous. So what we can do is grab this and just separate these keys out a little bit. If we play it from here on, it gets a little too fast. So what we can do again is just drag these out. So I'm always going back and scrubbing through, going back to a certain point and then playing it and watching it. So we'll drag this one out a little bit. Yeah, we're just going to keep refining our timing here. We're going to keep moving things around, moving our poses around just with the move control right now, and just get our timing the way we like it. Let's take a look at this now. So here's the next thing we're going to learn about the graph editor. You can break tangents. So all these right now, some of them are on spline. These are flat. So let's select this flat key here. As we scrub over that, you can take a look and see that the ball is sort of skimming the ground, and what we really want it to do is not ease in and out of this position. We want it to hit and immediately come back up. So what we could do is select that key and click on our linear tangent here. This is something like what we want, but I want to control these curves a little bit better. So what I'm going to do is break the tangent. So hit this button here to break tangents, and what that allows us to do is grab each side of the Bezier handles and move them individually like this. So I just want to get a really nice arc on this ball bounce. So I'm going to bend that a little bit more and bend this one a little, and that'll cause it to immediately shoot back up into the air. So I'm just going to go ahead and fix these curves. The way this animation curve looks is exactly what it's going to look like in this path of action in the camera view. So just make this ball start a little higher just so we can get a nice arc here, and just bend the curves and move them up and down accordingly. Get this one to bounce a little bit better. You can select those two and hit spline. You can also select the handles from 2 different keys, and middle mouse button, you can do this. That makes things faster. Alright, we're going to go through and break the tangents on all these bottom ones here. Okay, so I don't want it to arc out like this. I just noticed that I need to move this whole pose in. So I'm just going to grab all the keys after it and just shift that in a little bit. So let's just check out those first 3 bounces and see how those look. So that looks way better. Okay. You can do them all in one shot. Just grab all these bottom keys and hit your break tangent button, and it will just break them all. And then we can go through and I'm going to adjust my heights. And then the last two can just be small little hops. So you want to get it. You want to get the top of the arc to be somewhat flat, just so that the ball hangs at the top for a bit, but not too flat, because then if it's too flat, it'll just X will take over and just make it go straight. Something along those lines. Alright, so let's check that out, and then we'll start putting in our rotations. That looks okay. You can see that the ball is now gaining on the camera a little bit. Let's go back to frame 1, and we'll select our ball. I just realized I didn't turn this off, so if you haven't already selected the geometry by accident, turn off your select surface objects. Alright, so now there's this red control that goes around the ball. That's our ball rotate control. Hit E on your keyboard to get your rotate manipulator, and you'll see that we need to rotate it in the Z axis. As the ball's bouncing down the stage, we want it to roll this way. So let's go to our rotate Z axis. Now we don't have anything keyed on it because we were only keying our moved control. So what we can do now actually is select the entire ball by pressing your ball button. Go to frame 1 and just press S. And then we can step. You can use this step button, or you can press the greater than key on your keyboard to go to our next keyframe and just press S. And just do it again. Keep doing it. Press S for each keyframe that we set. And that'll just key all the controls. So now we'll go directly to the rotate control and go to rotate Z. Now you can see we put a bunch of keyframes in there. We didn't really have to do all that, but we will for the poses that we're going to do in a few minutes for the stretch and squash. So just to get the rotation, it's going to rotate at a pretty steady pace until it stops. So for now, let's just get rid of all these keys in the middle. Leave the first and last one on the rotate Z. And then we'll press delete on our keyboard. And then if you grab that last key, you can move it up. Move it the other way. See the result in the camera view? So we're going to scale this down a little bit. Move it way down. And just give it a bunch of turns. Okay, so let's go to frame 1 and just scrub over this a little bit. So you can see there's some rotation on it now. Let's make this a more constant speed. So you can just select the curve and bend it, or you can just select the key and hit linear, your linear tangent. So it's just spinning right away. It doesn't slow into a spin. So if we play that, let's check that. Okay, so it needs to spin a little bit more, and give it a few more turns, and check that out. Let's play it. Okay, so that's fine for now. So it needs to come to a settle. So we'll go all the way to 100, set a key, and we'll just bring that last one down a tiny bit. If we scrub over that last part, it looks like it's sliding a little bit, so it needs to come down a little more. So we're just dragging this key down a little bit, which is increasing the amount of times it turns. So basically you just got to keep playing with that until you get it look like it's not sliding anymore. So if we play it now, we have this action happening. Alright, now we're going to get some stretch and squash going on this ball. I actually don't like how it's spinning so fast at the beginning, so I'm just going to calm this down a little bit. We'll flatten it out, and we'll just calm it down a little. Okay. Alright, so let's put some stretch and squash on this ball. So let's grab the control for the stretching and the squashing. This ball top control, we'll use this. We'll squash this down and hit S on our keyboard. And if we scale this graph editor out, we'll see the effect. We'll see the curve. Okay, so we need the stretch happening too, so we probably do it the keyframe before, and we'll just stretch it. In this case now we can move it a little bit to the, we can use the X, translation X as well. And then on launch it's going to stretch again, and we'll use the X to get it to aim to where it's going. That's really important. You want the stretch pose to be aiming toward its landing point or its impact position. We'll just use the translate X to get it to aim to where it's going and to where it's been. Okay, so there's the impact. So for every bounce, it's going to squash a little bit less because it's not impacting the ground as hard. So it should stretch and squash a little bit less than it did before. So here you can see it, the stretch and the squash are pretty extreme. On the next bounce, let's make them a little less extreme. And after this point, you really don't need much, just keep it really subtle. If you want to zero it out, you can just go to your channel box and press 0. On these smaller bounces, I think I'm not going to have it stretch out in Y, just going to sort of aim it to where it's going with the X. And then these last couple bounces, I don't think I'm going to stretch and squash that at all. So if we play that now, that looks okay. But we want to get those impact poses to read a little bit more. Alright, so now that we have our ball bounce pretty much completed, let's put in some of those moving holds on the impact pose for the ball bounce, just to get that little bit of springiness in the bounce. So we don't want to screw up our other animation too badly. We just want to select the move node and hold that. We're going to have to also hold the placement node too, and the squash control. So if we select that move node, we just want to get that to sit still for now. So let's just get it to be static on the impact pose for now. So we'll hold that for one frame. We can copy and paste. And you'll see here now if we go to our translate Y, it sort of messed around with our animation curves. We also want to hold the top control, so we can copy it to the next frame, the frame next to it. So when we scrub over it, it should look something like this. Now the placement node is still moving it in X, so we can see that still happening, but we won't worry about that just yet. We'll fix that later. It's really just the move control and the squash control. So we'll just go to each one of our impact poses, and we'll just space the keys out a little bit on the timeline. So for this one, instead of going to the squash pose, we'll take the squash pose and everything after it, and just slide it one frame down the timeline, and then go back and copy this squash pose to the frame right next to it. But we're only going to do the move control and the squash control. So I'll select the move and the squash, and you can copy and paste, or you can middle mouse button drag it over to the right one frame, and that should just hold it. Let's just do the first two for now and see how that looks. Okay, so on that hold, we'll just bring the squash down a little bit more. So if we scrub back and forth over that, we should see that springiness. You can do it in the graph editor too. You have the squash control selected. You grab that second key that we copied and just move it down a little, and then see the result by scrubbing over. Okay, so it squashes a little more. And then on that second one, we'll go to the second one. We'll just move that one down a little bit. I think we can do it to the third one too. So we'll just go to the pose after it, select all the ones after that, move it over one frame, copy and paste the impact pose right into the frame right next to it, and then we'll get that squash down a little bit, but I didn't do the move, so hold on, I'm going to do the move too. Let's move everything over one frame here. Actually, this one I can stretch it up a little bit actually. So we'll stretch it up a little further than the one previous to it. We'll just look at that springy look. Okay, so let's just check out our animation now. Okay, so it messed up our move a little bit, so let's go to our, let's select our move control, and we'll go to translate Y, focus on that. Gotta break these tangents again, and just fix this curve. So let's check that out. That should look okay. It does look kind of odd how it's slipping like that. So what we're going to do is after all, we are going to adjust this placement node a little bit. So it's just the translate X. So just go to the poses where it's sliding, and you can key to both of those, 14 and 15. Then if you go into your graph editor, select the translate X curve. So what you can do is just make those flat, or make them linear actually, and then you can make these two key poses, or these two keyframes, completely flat, so there's no movement at all. So what that'll do is just keep it totally still. If you drag over those two frames, you'll see it just squashes, and then you go to the next impact pose. Instead of having it roll like that, we'll just key those two frames. We'll go with linear, and then bring those together. It'd be the same thing if you copied and pasted those two frames next to each other. We'll just set two keys there on the moving hold. Keep those linear and flatten them out. Okay, so let's play our results now. It's looking a little better. I'm noticing though that it's shooting forward quite a bit in X right here. So that's just because of the translate X angle here. So we'll just bring these down a little bit, and it'll just change the place where it actually impacts the ground. So just scrub over it and check your arcs. Make sure that it's a nice arc and it's even. So that goes a little far. So we'll just bring that one down a little bit, which will bring it back. So let's take a look at it now. I'm just going to make some adjustments on the camera now, and then we'll be finished with this one. So let's go to our outliner, select the pause, position of the camera. So shift select your ball placement, select the camera position, and then shift select your ball placement. So what we're going to do is just take a quick look at the translate X values for both. So in the graph editor, we have both selected, so both will be in the graph editor now. So you can select the translate X of the camera position, and then if you hold control down, you can select the translate X of the ball. So if we take a look at both of these, what we want is for the camera to be following the ball. So you can see here it starts to lag behind. So it'd be nice to have it come in a frame, maybe come to about the center of frame. Once it gets to the center, the camera just kind of keeps it centered. So let's just select the camera position, and we'll just set a key on the translate Y. Then we can select that key in the graph editor and move it so that the ball is centered in frame, and then just bend the curve a little bit, and let's take a look at how that works out. Okay, so we're going to put a little bit of an ease on the camera move. So ideally what you want is for the camera to just sort of lag behind the action just a little bit, as if human were to be holding a camera. Oftentimes when something moves quickly, they react after the fact. So what we're going to do is have the camera just drag behind a little bit. So just bend the curve so that you get the ball staying more to the left of center. And then something like this is fine. And you could even put a bit of a hold on the end of the camera move so that it actually stops before the ball, and that just gives it a nice little touch as well. So you can just copy the last keyframe of the camera move to about 6 or 8 frames down into the animation. That way the camera stops and then the ball keeps rolling. And we just notice I got a little bit of a slide on the ball, so we're just gonna let's go in and we'll grab that rotation control, rotate Z, F to frame it all. Just give it a little bit more rotation at the end. Give me about a 10 frame hold at the end after the ball and the camera stop, just for presentation. You can hide this reference. You can hide your grid by going to display, get rid of the grid. First make sure your render globals are set to 720 HD. So go to image size, presets, HD 720, and then just close that up. And then we'll go to the timeline and right click, Play Blast option box, all the same settings as before, QuickTime, H264, crank all these up to 100, and then render display size from render settings. And then make sure this save to file is checked, and then browse for an area to save it. Give it a name, ball bounce, and then just save that, and then hit play blast. So that could settle a little more at the end, but I'll let you guys refine yours even further. Alright, so that's it for Maya Basics 4. We'll see you over in Maya Basics 5.